Do you have a keyboard for the original Apple Macintosh with keys that don't work well or at all? I did, and I fixed the keys by surgically targeting and cleaning the key switch electrical contacts. I've made this video to share how I did this and what I learned along the way. As I understand it, the Apple model M0110 keyboard was only ever made using these Alps SKCC key switches. The key switches were also used in some Apple model M0110A enhanced keyboards, the ones with the additional numeric keypad, some Apple III keyboards, and Radio Shack Model 1 and Model 3 computers. Searching the internet for switch restoration solutions, I only found ones that I didn't like a lot, such as bending one of the internal springs, taking working keys from donor keyboards, buying older replacement switches, because these aren't made anymore, and stealing parts from other similar but not entirely compatible Alps key switch models. So I investigated the internal workings of the switch to figure out if I could clean the electrical contacts. I discovered that the electrical contacts were buried inside a permanently assembled component, but I was successful in getting inside that component to the degree that I could clean the actual electrical contacts. I had 13 keys on my newly acquired keyboard that were not functioning properly, ranging from completely dead to sometimes working if I wiggled the key while pressing it. And the cleaning results were so impressive, I think it's worth sharing. This process requires removing the defective key switch from the keyboard. There are several videos out there that explain how to do that. So I'll defer you to find one of those, but it's basically desoldering the two switch leads and unclipping the switch from the keyboard frame. To describe parts of the key switch, I'll be using many terms that I just made up because I didn't find any official documentation with the proper terms. Okay, let's take one of the key switches apart to see how it's constructed. This is a complete key assembly as it would be installed on a finished keyboard. Normally this key cap will have been removed in the process of removing the key switch from the keyboard. I have here the white key stem and then the housing. The housing is made up of two pieces. There's this upper black housing which holds all the components, and then this gray lower housing which latches onto the upper housing to hold all the components together and also provides the latch points for holding it into the keyboard's metal frame. Let's take off this lower housing, and I'm going to hold it with that lower housing up so the pieces don't fall all over the place. To do this, I like to use a small paper clip that I've sanded the end to deburr it and give it a little bit of a point. Makes it easier to insert. And what we're going to do is find these flaps in the lower housing that are used to latch it onto the upper housing. We're just going to insert the paper clip under that flap from the side and then turn the paper clip. Now it's unlatched from the upper housing on one side. Let's do it to the other side. And just slide the lower housing off. So what we got inside here is the key return spring, the key stem, and the contact module. The contact module has this little legged spring on it. I'm just going to take that off. And what we're left with is the mystery component that was the real target of my investigation. This was clearly the piece that provides the electrical contact for the switch. You can see here there are two little plastic nubs, which presumably are to guide all the components into alignment within the module and also hold them together. Those nubs are presumably molded into this black plastic face. I didn't want to mess with these to take it apart for fear that I wouldn't be able to get it back together. And I didn't have a broken one that I wanted to noodle with, so I just put on my magnifier goggles and inspected it really well and tried to figure out how it worked. I'll put up an illustration here and explain what I think is going on inside here. All right, what we have here are the three major functional components of the switch. Up front is the stem, which rests on top of the key return spring, and behind those is the contact module. And you'll note that on the contact module on the front there is that little metal piece with like two legs hanging down. Okay, let me get this to a side view here. Okay, so when the user presses a key, the downward movement of the stem causes this little offset on the stem to brush the lower legs of what I'm calling the limiter spring. This converts the downward vertical motion into a horizontal force on the contact module, and I'll explain more about that shortly. Note that the maximum horizontal force on the contact module is purely dependent on the rear stem offset that brushes against the limiter spring legs and the spring's resistance. This means that the user creates the most contact force simply by pressing the key far enough, and that happens before the key stem bottoms out. Once the stem is beyond the contact actuation threshold, no amount of user force will improve the contact. This is why I call it the limiter spring. It limits the contact module actuation force. There's one subtle exception to this, which is that when the electrical contact is on the edge of working, jiggling the key, and thus the key stem, will create tiny variations in the force being applied to the limiter spring, which may cause momentary contact within the contact module. This is why jiggling a bad key sometimes works. Now that we know how the key press actuates the contact module, let's take a look at how the contact module works. Okay, what we have here is an exploded view of my guess on the internal construction of the contact module. On the bottom left is the limiter spring. Just a short deviation from the topic of actuation. The limiter spring has a second function for the contact module. If you recall from the disassembly section, the bottoms of the elements are held together by little plastic nubs. However, there are no such nubs for the tops of the elements. The nubs aren't holding things together super tight either, so the tops of the elements are just kind of flapping around. This limiter spring, when clipped over the top of all the other elements sandwiched together, holds the tops together. Note that the spring is metal and is in contact with the last element in the sandwich, but this is inconsequential. Now, continuing on with actuation. The stem has been pressed down and pushes on the legs of the limiter spring. The spring wants to stay decompressed, so it's going to compensate by pushing to the right. And the little bump it has in the middle of its opposite side will engage what I'm calling the guide plate. The guide plate also has two functions. One function is as a tray to hold the other elements to its right in the diagram. You can see the aforementioned little nubs at the bottom there. The second function it has is to transfer the limiter spring actuation force further through the contact module using the little flexible arm molded into the middle. The arm, too, has a bump on the opposite side. The next two elements sandwiched together, the front terminal and the leaf contact, function as a switch pole, similar to the last element, the rear terminal. Each pole has a solder terminal and an electrical contact surface for the respective pole. However, whereas the rear terminal is one element that provides both functions, the front terminal provides only the solder terminal and is open in the middle so that the actuation force is transmitted to the next element, the leaf contact. The leaf contact is a separate electrical contact surface that is made of a thinner, flexible metal, which when pressed on by the guide plate's arm will deform and touch the rear terminal to complete the switch's electrical circuit. Since the front terminal and leaf contact are metal, they function electrically as one element. So the electrical path for a closed switch is through the front terminal, the leaf contact, and the rear terminal. Lastly, between the leaf contact and rear terminal is a presumably plastic spacer. It isolates the front and rear poles for a normally open behavior and has a hole in the middle so that the leaf contact can protrude through it to touch the rear terminal. From this, you can probably see what I was after. The inside surfaces and between the leaf contact and the rear terminal that touch through the spacer are the regions that I wanted to clean. Here's a macro shot from the rear of the contact module showing one of the top corners. In the back here we have the guide plate. In front of that we have the front terminal. Next is the leaf contact. Then the clear plastic spacer. And finally the rear terminal. We'll enter these two gaps and clean those surfaces. Some words about the two most important tools I use in this cleaning process. The first is I use contact cleaner, cleaner only. I do not use cleaner lubricant. This is because the lubricant leaves behind a residue and I don't want that to inadvertently create some tackiness between the contact elements. Likewise, I've heard of people spraying WD-40 down into the key switch. WD-40 leaves behind a film, and I wouldn't want to risk that. Second is an index card. This is just a standard index card with no lines on it. I guessed that this would provide a nice fine scrubbing medium during the cleaning. It stayed relatively firm when it got wet from the contact cleaner, and I knew it wouldn't rip as easy as just plain paper when it was wet. So those are the most important things. Okay, let's test the switch to assess its current condition. What I do is I press the arm in the guide plate at the very end. I don't know if you can see it, but there's sort of a little divot in there where the bump on the limiter spring mates with that guide plate arm. So what I do is I just very gently touch that spot, and it should require like virtually no pressure. As a matter of fact, right now what I'm doing is I'm pressing the arm and I can actually see it touching and moving the leaf contact, and there's still no sound. I have to give just a little pressure for it to make contact. Okay. Normally when I have it cleaned, it doesn't require that much pressure. Another test is if you press on this arm lower where it doesn't have as much leverage, in a very clean contact, even that will work. So if I press it here, you can see I get the same thing. I have to press it a little harder, but I shouldn't need to press much at all. Okay, so let's clean this bad boy and see what happens. Okay, this might get a little dicey here, because I'm not sure how well the focus is going to work, and I got my magnifier goggles on, so I can't see anything except this tiny thing. But here's what we're going to do. One note is you might see here that by kind of twisting the leads, you can get those elements to spread out a little. So that's what I'm going to do to kind of give myself a better chance. So what I'm going to do is take my little piece of paper I have here. I'm going to dip it in the contact cleaner, and then I have to very quickly get it in between there before the contact cleaner evaporates. You can see I'm between the leaf contact and the plastic. And I'm just going to press the sandwich together a little and rub the paper around. By putting in diagonally like this, that point can reach further down inside the module. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go between the spacer and the rear terminal. And I'm pressing that sandwich together decent, just not hard, because I want to get that scrubbing action. And then for good measure, go ahead and do it again. Here's between the leaf and the spacer, and then I'll do the rear terminal again right there. I don't know if you can see with the lighting there, that one is behind the spacer from us, and then that is in front. Okay, here we are. Let's give it a test. Indeed, that's a little bit better. Now this switch was already working. It was just, not the most sensitive switch. And then let's test on the lower part of the arm. Yeah, works pretty good. And with that, the cleaning task is complete. I again defer you to videos that were already out there describing how to disassemble and reassemble the keyboard and the key switches. I have a few additional notes to make after reviewing what I recorded. When you're cleaning the contacts, soak the paper strips really good, even to the point that some of the contact cleaner drips into the contact module. This helps ensure that some of the cleaner gets down in there before it evaporates. The next time I clean one of these, I might try using a dropper to inundate the contact surfaces just before sticking the paper strips in there. In the video where I was testing the switch, I had two connectors attached to the contact module leads. Those are just standard prototyping jumper wires, and I have some with a little clip hook at one end. If you turn a female jumper connector diagonally, it fits onto the lead nicely. And for those curious about my over-the-top 3D graphics, They were created using TurboCAD Designer 2D 3D version 5, which was released in the 1996-97 time frame. I've been running it for probably 15 years on whatever version of Microsoft Windows has been current at the time. Like I'm running it on Windows 11 right now. It has its quirks, and I've had to patch it a couple times to keep it running, but I find it fun to use and figure out. So, I hope this video was useful or otherwise informative to you. Thanks for watching.